Hello! Today I thought I would have a little bit of discussion with you about my writing. I've spoken about it recently without really going into detail, so I thought I would let you know where I'm at. So those of you who have been around for a while will know that I, so far in my writing journey, have kind of focused on short stories, and I think there are a few different reasons for that. I think generally a short story is a less daunting prospect. So when I was starting out in writing and I realised that you could write short stories instead of full-length novels, I got very excited and kind of jumped on that bandwagon. And also I think, though it's harder to make money with short stories, it's kind of a faster turnover. So generally I think for the most part with short stories you will send them off to journals or to competitions and ultimately will see a return from that much sooner, whereas with a novel you have to send off to agents and then publishers. I think the average span is at least a year or two from when you send off your manuscript to when you actually have a published book. So my mind was sort of on the instant gratification. I wanted to do it now and I focused on short stories, and don't get me wrong, I had some success there. I had a story published in a physical journal, I had a story published on an online zine, I also had a story published on the radio, which was very exciting. So it wasn't a complete waste of time, and I think ultimately short story writing is really interesting in that it gets you really precise with your language. It teaches you how to be quite poetic. Short stories are, disclaimer, a very different form to novels. Generally I think they're quite good in that they teach you how to sort of put a plot arc together in a short space of time. They also teach you, as I say, about poetic language and using words sparsely, and they are useful for all manner of reasons, and I think every writer could benefit from trying out a short story from time and again. However, last year my writing really went downhill. Around May of last year I decided that I was going to put some of the short stories that I'd written already together as a collection and write other stories that fitted into that collection. And when I made that decision I was really excited about it. I had some material that I was happy with, and I thought a short story collection would perhaps be a good way into a longer piece of work for me. However, since making that decision, admittedly a lot of life things changed. I moved house, blah blah blah, so that didn't help. But generally since I made that decision I kind of didn't really produce anything. I mean, I've got scraps from last year that I will turn into something eventually, but I found that I wasn't inspired to write. I wasn't producing anything that I was excited about. Everything was kind of just bitty, and there was one short story in particular which I wrote time and again, and I spent literally about 6 months trying to write, and it just wouldn't come to fruition. And I think the reason that I had this difficulty, and the reason that I realised in January of this year, is that I don't think short stories are necessarily my favourite thing, especially since I've stopped reading as many short story collections. When I come back to them I realise that they're just not a medium that I'm naturally comfortable in. As I say, I'm glad that I spent the time that I spent on short stories. I think it was worthwhile. It's given me a good grounding for my writing practice. It's given me a good grounding for building things like characters and, as I say, plot arcs and things. But in January of this year I decided that I'd had enough of short stories. They were pulling me down. Ultimately I didn't see that my career could be in short stories anyway, because it's not really a lucrative enough or in demand enough medium for that to happen. So I made the decision at the start of this year to put stories to my side and focus on novels. Now, I had started writing a middle grade novel about 2 years ago when I took 6 months off of work to focus on my writing, and I had the most part of that novel together, but I think I kind of reached a point where I was stressed about it and I wasn't feeling like it was going well, and I then got a job. So I used that as an excuse to completely put that novel aside and say, well, that was a good practice, you know, we'll forget about that. And in January this year I was going through my notes for that novel. I realised that I had a whole lot more of it than I had thought I'd got done, basically. I thought it was kind of just scraps and it wasn't really coming together and there was no real plot. And going back through my notes I realised that there very much was a plot, and though it wasn't a perfect thing yet, it only needed a little bit more work. However, there was a spanner in the works because I thought that I had lost the final draft that I'd written of that book on a laptop that broke, and at the time it hadn't bothered me because I hadn't thought I was going to be going back to it. So I had a major meltdown and thought that I was going to have to start the whole thing again. I started trying to write out memory flashcards and all sorts of things to remind myself of the plot. Luckily I do a lot of my sort of first-hand thinking in a physical notepad, so I had sort of scenes here and there that I could kind of put together, and then by fluke I found that I actually had a hidden copy of that draft on a memory stick, which I don't even remember putting on there. Let's call it fate or something, but it was on there. So I spent the first 6 months of this year working on that, which I finished in July. I think I finished at the start of July, and I have been sending it off to agents since then. No luck yet, but you know, I think these things do take quite a lot of time, and I'm remaining positive. And we come on to what I'm doing now. So I am currently working on my first full-length adult novel. It's literary, kind of magically fiction, and I'm really excited about it. I've got about 4,000 words so far. I've also joined a Faber Academy course, which I spoke about briefly in a few videos ago, which is really fantastic so far. And basically the purpose of this video is to say that I think my writing has very much changed course. I think I feel so much better and I feel more like a writer now that I'm writing novels aside from short stories. As I say, short stories still have their place, and there are still some short stories that I've got dabbling on the side, but I think they are definitely the reason that I have kind of stalled up until this point. And I think there's also this panic in me now because it's probably unrealistic, and I know that it doesn't matter what age you are, you can always get published, but it kind of, writing since I was like 20 years old and before, but mainly when I was 20, I decided that that was what I was going to do with my life, and I got a crappy job and focused all my energy and my spare time on my writing. But I feel like short stories kind of kiboshed me and took me on the wrong route within my writing path, and now I feel a little bit panicked because I'm just starting to submit to agents and I'm just starting my first adult novel, and I'm kind of very conscious of the fact that I'm 27 now. So even if, you know, I wrote it in a year, say, and started sending it out, I wouldn't see it published until I was in my 30s, and it just panics me. I think it's that feeling of I can't do enough of the things and I don't have time to do the things. However, it's fine. I'm happy, as I say, with writing long books. I think it definitely feels like I found myself as a writer more than when I was focusing on short stories. I know that it's not ideal in the length of time that these things take. However, I think as a writer you do have to play the long game, and I think I was listening to a interview with Jessie Burton on a podcast not long ago, and Jessie Burton is she's not my favourite writer, but she's one of these authors that I just find eternally inspiring. I don't know what it is about her. I think is that we have a lot in common, and she puts really hard to describe thoughts into really concise language. Anyway, I was listening to an interview with her where she was saying about, you know, you have to play the long game with these things. You have to be determined. You have to keep pushing. It's not one of those things where you're going to see instant success. You might not even see success until you're 40. So in that way, it's different from most careers, you know. By age 40 in most careers, you are, you know, well established in your field. But with writing, I think it's different. And I also don't think that these are wasted years. I think these are the years that kind of craft you into the writer that you are. I'm also aware that somebody who's published in their 30s is considered young. So, you know, I'm positive. As I say, I'm feeling better about things, and I'm feeling confident, and I'm really excited about this idea. Please let me know down below what's going on in your writing lives. Have you had any exciting changes or changes of path? Have you ever found yourself going down the wrong route with your writing? Let me know. Let's chat about it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.